Enzo Maresca versus Pep Guardiola, Chelsea versus Manchester City. We went down to the game, watched it in person. I wanted to give you guys my tactical analysis of the match. Should fans be worried about where Chelsea is currently at in their preparations? And should Manchester City fans be happy about where they're at? So if you look at both of the lineups, Manchester City without still quite a few of their starting players or their higher profile players. Chelsea really only missing Cucurella and Cole Palmer. But for the most part, Chelsea, I felt like, had a larger majority of their group than Manchester City did. So as the game kicks off, Chelsea is in a 3-2-5 in possession, which I found to be very interesting because it's a high risk playing against a team like Manchester City in a formation that has so many players forward. Obviously, it didn't work the way that Chelsea wanted it to because within the first 5 minutes, Chelsea was already down 2-0. Penalty, which Haaland put away, and then Chelsea sloppily playing out of the back, Manchester City managing to pick their pocket, giving the ball to Haaland, and then obviously from there, it's going to be a goal. So what I found interesting is that Chelsea pushed Enzo a little bit higher up the pitch, almost with that front line. So they would have Lavia and Caicedo as the two pivots when they were trying to build with a back three. I could see what Maresca wanted to do, and I felt like if he had Cole Palmer, that would be the natural position for him, where Enzo and Caicedo would be the two that would sit in to help build out the possession. Unfortunately, I don't think Caicedo has enough quality in that sixth position, especially against a team like Manchester City who presses so well. And he turned over the ball a couple times in really dangerous spots that Manchester City took advantage of. So just going into the Premier League season, I felt like overall there was a sense of the players not really understanding each other's movements. There was not as much chemistry as I would have liked, which is understandable, again, because a lot of players were missing because of the international tournaments. However, that is one of the biggest differences I saw between Chelsea and Liverpool. Even though Liverpool had a lot of their academy players, there was a set system and a set way of playing, especially as they built out of the back, that everybody was on the same page. Chelsea, I felt like, were very unsure of themselves. However, I do feel like there was a style of play that Enzo Maresca is keen on trying to play. And this is also why I think Pep Guardiola is such a good manager, because his tactics are almost always right. Playing against Chelsea, knowing that Chelsea is going to play with the back three, what Manchester City did was they had Haaland, Grealish, and Oscar Bob as far stretched out as possible. So literally you had Oscar Bob on one end line over here, Jack Grealish on one end line over here, and then Erling Haaland right in the middle. And when you do that to a back line of three, it forces them to stretch out, leaving a lot of gaps in the middle. So it's very difficult to play a back three when teams play like that against you, just because you end up going 1-for-1 across the back. And if you're not 100% sure that you have enough quality from those center backs, or even just enough possession of the ball to be able to keep it so that never happens, you're playing a huge risk. And worst of all, you never want to leave Haaland 1v1 centrally, because if the ball gets played in behind or even to his feet, you know what's going to happen in a 1-versus-1 battle with Erling Haaland. So what Chelsea started doing was whenever the ball was on one side, they'd bring the third center back and they would tuck them in so that they would be more central, so that it would almost be a 2-versus-1 in the middle, and then you'd have the player out wide on the ball. The problem with that is if you don't have immediate pressure on the ball, again, Manchester City has enough quality to play that long diagonal to the one striker who's free. And so oftentimes they played that ball either to Oscar Bob or they played that ball to Jack Grealish. And by the time that ball got there, again, you're back to a 1-versus-1 out wide. And the higher up the pitch that happens, the more likely that Manchester City is going to have a goal-scoring opportunity. Here is another reason why Manchester City is so good, is that when Manchester City gets higher up into the attacking third and they get the ball in areas where potentially they might lose it, they're so good at preparing for the counterattack that as soon as they lose the ball, Chelsea wasn't able to complete 3 or 4 passes before Manchester City was able to regain possession, and all of a sudden they're still in the attacking third, ready to have another opportunity to score. So that was, I think, the main issue with Maresca, is he just hasn't had enough time with his squad to be able to play in the formation and the style that he wants to play. And on top of that, you're playing against a team that has a system and a philosophy that's established well, and every single player coming up from the academy can just fit right into that system without Pep having to reteach all of his tactics. I think one of the positives of Chelsea is when they do manage to break the press, they have a lot of numbers going forward. And as the game started playing out, once the nerves went away and once Manchester City was pretty comfortable with the lead, Chelsea started having a little bit of a better spell in possession. And so when they're trying to build out with the 5 players, the 3 center backs and those 2 center mids, eventually they managed to break a line into one of the 5 players in that front line. And I think that was where they had the most chemistry in terms of when they finally played that ball that broke in. You always had one of those players, whether it was Enzo or Nkunku, who would create enough separation from those center backs to receive that ball in a pocket and then eventually go out wide. And obviously, if you're playing with a front line of 5, those players in those wide positions are already there. Now, running into more problems for Chelsea, though, every time they got the ball to Mudryk, he was very unsuccessful. And he was going up against Wilson Esbrand for the majority of the first half. And I don't think he got past him once. And that's something that should worry Chelsea fans, because you spent so much money on a player that right now is struggling in preseason to look like a player that's actually going to be effective and is going to be a superstar for you during the season. If he can't be successful, not even one time, against a younger player coming up through the Manchester City Academy that is probably not going to get a lot of playing time this season, it's probably not going to be a starter, you just start to think that he's probably not going to be a player you can rely on this season. And that's a huge waste of money for Chelsea. Now, if I was a Chelsea fan, should I be worried going into the season? I think so. And it's one of those situations where you've spent so much money thinking that you were going to get immediate results. And now, from what I've been hearing, talking to a lot of Chelsea fans, they all believe that it's time for a rebuild. And not necessarily a rebuild as in sell everyone and get new players, but a rebuild as in we got to stop spending money. We got to stop buying new players. We got to focus on what we have and just take some time for them to learn the system, the tactics, and the philosophy that Enzo Maresca wants. I think Enzo Maresca, coming from the school of Pep Guardiola, is a good manager. When you pick apart all of the negatives and everything that happened in the match, ultimately what you want to see in preseason is some sort of a style of play. And that was evident. That was clear. I thought it was way too risky, but I could understand why he's doing that in preseason. So I wouldn't be one of those fans that wants Maresca out just yet, but I do think you no longer have the time to say we need an entire season to get these players steered in the right direction before we start getting results. However, that leads into the exact same problem that Chelsea has been having over the past few years is you need to accept that you are no longer the team you were when you could win a trophy every other year. Now, with Manchester City's dominance, with Arsenal having such a good squad and being consistently number 2, potentially being the favorite for this year, Liverpool with a manager that the fans are getting behind, and a really clear and effective style of play. As a Chelsea fan, I would hope that we finish in the top 4 so that we get into the Champions League, and then in the following year, you can actually be a title contender. However, right now, if there's any Chelsea fan that actually believes that they could win the Premier League this season, I would say you're very far off.